Hello, everyone. This is David Aguilar, and today is Tuesday, the 28th. I'm sorry for getting back to you guys so late. I know I promised that I would have had a lecture ready this weekend after Thanksgiving, but it was a pretty long weekend, lots of grading and trying to catch up on the discussion board posts. And I think I graded two more discussion board forums yesterday, and I should have the last one finished either by today or tomorrow. Um, I'm trying to get back, and this is fine. I think will be the last integrity lecture that I do for this class. Short of some other thing that comes up at the last minute, but I think this should be the last one. So today I'm really going to talk about a couple of things. One is going to be one more element that we haven't really touched on, and that we're going to be doing in the next discussion board. I'm going to talk to you guys also about the literary analysis assignment, which is going to be due the 13th of December. So you guys have about 2 weeks for that. Um, and I think the last thing we'll talk about is just really the outcome for this semester and what we need to focus on from here on out. All right, so let's get started and let's do one thing at a time. For one thing, we've already covered two plays so far. A Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen. We're covering Sure Thing right now by David Ives, and you guys should be finishing up the discussion board postings pretty soon. But the next play, which I haven't made available yet, but I will as soon as this lecture is recorded, um, the next play we're going to focus on is Trifles, and it's going to be the last play we do. It's probably one of my favorite plays. It's a very serious play. It's not like Sure Thing. Sure Thing was a very short one-act play that was obviously very funny and very obvious in its message, but Trifles is a lot like A Dollhouse in the sense that there is a lot of undertones. There's clearly a lot of dialogue that's rich with subtext and irony, and the overall message might be difficult to understand on your first reading. You're probably gonna have to read it two or three times, and it's not too long of a play. It is also a one-act play, just like Sure Thing, but it is considerably longer than Sure Thing. Sure Thing's probably maybe 3 pages, 4 pages long. Trifles, I think, is more like 10, 11. But it's still not that long, and I think you'll have plenty of time this coming week to get started on it. But it was very enjoyable for me the first time I read it, and I actually saw it the first time. And then there was a short story that came out that was based on it as well. And then they made a movie about it much later. But essentially, the story is actually based or the play is based on a true story. So it's worth looking in, and I think you'll appreciate it as much as I did. All right, but before I talk about Trifles or about the literary analysis assignment, I want to talk to you guys about irony. Now, irony is kind of varies depending on who you ask, but there are some basic forms of irony, um, and you can look at the textbook sort of definition of irony, and you'll get some different ones. In fact, if I were to Google irony right now, I'm sure I'd get just some general definition of it. This one says the expression of one's meaning by using language that normally signifies the opposite, typically for humorous or emphatic effect. And I think that's generally how it's used, but I think the last one here is probably more accurate to what we're doing in this class, and it's a literary technique originally used in Greek tragedy by which the full significance of a character's words or actions are clear to the audience or reader, although unknown to the character. And that's actually a specific type of irony called dramatic irony, and that's one of the three we're going to talk about. And so rather than telling you what it is and just sort of giving you the theory, I really wanted to sort of show you what it looks like by using a short story. This is a short story by Kate Chopin. You'll notice it's a page and a half long. It's really short. It's called The Story of an Hour. It's a very famous short story. And I know we're done with short stories for the semester, but I felt like if I read this with you guys and kind of show you where irony is happening and how we know it's there and what purpose it serves or why it's effective I think then it'll make the literary analysis that you're about to turn in a couple of weeks a lot easier for you. So I'm going to read this with you first, and then we'll go and see where we see irony. Okay. Story of an hour. Knowing that Mrs. Mallard was afflicted with a heart trouble, great care was taken to break to her as gently as possible the news of her husband's death. It was her sister Josephine who told her, in broken sentences, veiled hints that revealed in half concealing. Her husband's friend Richards was there too, near her. It was he who had been in the newspaper office when intelligence of the railroad disaster was received, with Brentley Mallard's name leading the list of killed. He had only taken the time to assure himself of its truth by a second telegram, and had hastened to forestall any less careful, less tender friend in bearing the sad message. She did not hear the story as many women have heard the same, with a paralyzed inability to accept its significance. She wept at once, with sudden, wild abandonment, in her sister's arms. When the storm of grief had spent itself, she went away to her room alone. She would have no one follow her. There stood, facing the open window, a comfortable, roomy armchair. Into this she sank, pressed down by a physical exhaustion that haunted her body and seemed to reach into her soul. She could see in the open square before her the tops of trees that were all aquiver with the new spring life. The delicious breath of rain was in the air. In the street below, a peddler was crying his wares. The notes of a distant song which someone was singing reached her faintly, and countless sparrows were twittering in the eaves. There were patches of blue sky showing here and there through the clouds that had met and piled one above the other in the west, facing her window. She sat with her head thrown back upon the cushion of the chair, quite motionless, except when a sob came up into her throat and shook her, as a child who has cried itself to sleep continues to sob in its dreams. She was young, with a fair, calm face whose lines bespoke repression and even a certain strength. But now there was a dull stare in her eyes, whose gaze was fixed away off yonder on one of those patches of blue sky. It was not a glance of reflection, but rather indicated a suspension of intelligent thought. There was something coming to her, and she was waiting for it, fearfully. What was it? She did not know. It was too subtle and elusive to name, but she felt it, creeping out of the sky, reaching toward her through the sounds, the scents, the color that filled the air. Now her bosom rose and fell tumultuously. She was beginning to recognize this thing that was approaching to possess her, and she was striving to beat it back with her will, as powerless as her two white slender hands would have been. When she abandoned herself a little, whispered word escaped her slightly parted lips. She said it over and over under her breath. Free, free, free. The vacant stare and the look of terror that had followed it went from her eyes. They stayed keen and bright. Her pulses beat fast, and the coursing blood warmed and relaxed every inch of her body. She did not stop to ask if it were or were not a monstrous joy that held her. A clear and exalted perception enabled her to dismiss the suggestion as trivial. She knew that she would weep again when she saw the kind, tender hands folded in death, the face that had never looked save with love upon her, fixed and gray and dead. But she saw beyond that bitter moment a long procession of years to come that would belong to her absolutely, and she opened and spread her arms out to them in welcome. There would be no one to live for her during those coming years. She would live for herself. There would be no powerful will bending hers in that blind persistence with which men and women believe they have a right to impose a private will upon a fellow creature. A kind intention or cruel intention make the act seem no less a crime as she looked upon it in that brief moment of illumination. And yet she had loved him, sometimes. Often she had not. What did it matter? What could love, the unsolved mystery, count for in face of this possession of self-assertion, which she suddenly recognized as the strongest impulse of her being? free, body and soul free, she kept whispering. Josephine was kneeling before the closed door with her lips to the keyhole, imploring for admission. Louise, open the door. I beg, open the door. You will make yourself ill. What are you doing, Louise? For heaven's sake, open the door. Go away. I am not making myself ill. No. She was drinking in a very elixir of life through that open window. Her fancy was running riot along those days ahead of her. Spring days and summer days and all sorts of days that would be her own. She breathed a quick prayer that life might be long. It was only yesterday, she had thought with a shudder, that life might be long. She arose at length and opened the door to his sister's importunities. There was a feverish triumph in her eyes, and she carried herself unwittingly like a goddess of victory. She clasped her sister's waist, and together they descended the stairs. Richards stood waiting for them at the bottom. Someone was opening the front door with a latchkey. It was Bentley Mallard who entered, a little travel-stained, composedly carrying his gripsack and umbrella. He had been far from the scene of accident, and did not even know there had been one. He stood amazed at Josephine's piercing cry, at Richard's quick motion to screen him from the view of his wife. But Richards was too late. When the doctors came, they said she had died of heart disease, of joy that kills. So, you'll notice this is a great story because this was written, I think, in the 1895, originally in 1894. So, late 19th century. This is before the women's suffrage movement. They didn't have a right to vote, and frankly, they didn't have a lot of rights at all. And clearly, Kate Chopin is making a comment about women being subjugated and repressed and imprisoned by husbands. And of course, she obviously doesn't care for her husband. I mean, she did love him, right? It says so, right? She loved him sometimes. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, and yet she loved him sometimes, but mostly she didn't, right? So she's really sad that he's gone, yeah, but she also is really, really happy that, he's dead, right? Because now she can live for herself. She's free, right? So that's what this story is about, and it's really short. And of course, we get this interesting thing, though, because we know that she's afflicted with a heart problem, right? Something is wrong with her heart. And so, we understand that, when her husband dies, everyone's thinking, oh, we got to be really gentle when we tell her this news. But what's funny, of course, is that when she does die from the heart disease, of course, that the doctors say, well, she died because she was just so happy to see you, right? She was just so happy to see that her husband was back from the dead, actually, and he didn't actually die. He was far away from the train accident. But of course, we know that that's not the case, and that's a form of irony. And so let's talk about irony for a moment. So irony here is when we have a difference in expectations, when one thing actually means another, or when one action actually suggests that something else is going to happen, right? It's ironic, for instance, I'm sure you guys are familiar with the banana peel sort of joke. Someone slips on a banana peel and they fall down and everyone laughs at them, ha ha ha, it's really funny. It would be ironic if, let's say you're laughing at someone for slipping on a banana peel, and then you slip on one yourself just moments later. And then that's ironic, right? You were just laughing about it, and now you're the butt of the joke. And so that's a small form of irony. It's not really a big deal. But in this story, we have three kinds of irony, and there's three main ones. There's verbal irony, dramatic irony, and situational irony. And these three, they're similar because, of course, they're all about a difference in expectation versus reality, but they present themselves in different ways. So as let's go in that order. Verbal irony is when someone says something but really means something else. The most obvious form of this kind of irony is sarcasm, right? Let's say someone breaks someone breaks your phone. Like someone asked to borrow your phone, they broke it, and you say, "Oh, great, thanks for that," right? Well, obviously you're saying, "Oh, great, thank you," but you're not really thankful, and you're not really excited that they did that. This is sarcasm. So, and that's actually a form of irony. and that's more specifically a form of verbal irony, where what you say is different than what is meant. So here, for instance, we understand that she says she's free, she's free, she's free. That's not really the part where we get this verbal irony. But what we notice here is this line from her sister Josephine. She says, "Louise, open the door. I beg, open the door. You will make yourself ill. What are you doing, Louise? For heaven's sake, open the door." And so what's happening here is clearly Josephine's asking to be, let in to the room because she suspects that her sister is making herself ill or making herself sick, like maybe her sister's suicidal, when that's not really the case, right? And of course, Louise Mallard responds with, "Go away, I am not making myself ill." When really we know actually she is. She is making herself sick because all of this excitement for wanting to be free. We even mentioned that her blood's pulsing, her beats racing faster. We know that her heart's already in sort of a sickness, so she is making herself ill. And so this is a sort of verbal irony when where one thing they say actually means something completely different. And there's not much quote or dialogue in this story. In fact, the only time we have dialogue is when she whispers to herself, free, free, free. She mentions body and soul free later on. And then, of course, this exchange between her and her sister. Otherwise, there's not that much verbal irony. But this is a short story, and not all short stories have to have dialogue. But you will notice that, obviously, when we go back to the plays, for instance, you'll notice that it's all dialogue, except for maybe a few stage directions and stage movements here and there. So, your job when you're analyzing plays is to determine where we're seeing, where one character says something, but actually it means something else, or whether it means something else to them, or whether it means something else to another character, or whether it means something else to the audience, right? And there's plenty of examples of this. If you think about Hills Like White Elephants, for instance, we know that it's a story about this couple who's inside of a bar in Spain, and they're talking about it's going to be simple, it'll be easy. They just let the air in basically, and we're not really sure what they're talking about until the very end when they're clearly talking about how to whether or not they should do the abortion, and so we don't know about that until much later. But there's lots of subtext, right? So that's a form of irony. The other form of irony, we'll call it situational irony, is when a certain circumstance or situation is supposed to be, we expect it to be a certain way or supposed to play out in a specific manner, but it goes in a different direction instead. So in this case, for instance, we have some of that at the very beginning, right? It says here, she did not hear the story of her husband's death, as many women have heard the same, with a paralyzed inability to accept its significance, right? So when most women hear about their husbands dying, they're sort of left speechless and motionless. They don't really know what to say. Instead, she wept at once with wild abandonment in her sister's arms, right? She cries and cries and cries into her sister. And finally, when she finally relaxed, she went to her room alone and she didn't want anyone to follow her. Right? Well, so far that seems like normal. Okay, it's not the most normal thing. Most people just are shocked by it and don't know how to react. But she reacted almost very, immediately. And she wants to go alone to her room. Like, okay, that seems like pretty normal behavior. But then in the very next passages, we see all these wonderful images, right? Of people singing outside, the sparrows outside, the blue sky, the open window, this idea of freedom, right? We have all of these things happening, and she's clearly, happy, right? And so she says here, she was young with a fair, calm face whose lines bespoke pressure and even a certain strength, but now there was a dull stare in her eyes, whose gaze was fixed away off yonder in one of those blue patches of sky, right? So, and she was having intelligent thought, right? It wasn't reflection. She wasn't reflecting on anything like, oh, now what's my life was going to be like, right? She's instead reflecting on like, oh, now I'm thinking. I'm thinking about what I can do now. So again, this is a sort of what we call situational irony, right? We expect the situation to play out specific way, right? If a husband dies, normally we'd expect, well, the spouse is probably going to be, bedridden and crying and inconsolable for a long time, for a while at least, until they can get over that trauma. But in here we have the exact opposite, where there is no trauma. They're perfectly happy to move on, right? So that's situational irony. But then we have something called dramatic irony, and it's very similar to situational irony in the sense that it's about actions or words that happen, but instead of it meaning something different to a character, it actually means something different to the audience. The character who says it, or the character to whom it's being said, are not aware of the irony. Only the audience is. And that's what dramatic irony is for. And it's called dramatic irony especially because it deals a lot with drama, where on stage, we have lots of dialogue happening on stage. And so the audience is aware of these things, but the characters within the play are not. And so we have an example of that at the very end, right? It says, when the doctors came in, they said she had died of heart disease, of joy that kills, right? So the doctors are telling him, oh, your wife must have been just too happy to see you. We're really sorry, right? But we as the audience, the readers, we know that that's not the case. We know exactly why she died. She died because all her hopes of being free all came crashing down the moment her supposedly or allegedly late husband walks in, proving that he is indeed alive and he is indeed going to continue to be her husband and keep her in this repressive state of commitment. So that would be dramatic irony. Again, when something that happens within the story or within the play, within the text, is known to those in the text, but means something completely different to the audience who's looking on, or the reader or the listener, in one case or another. We saw that, or we see that, I think, a little bit in Sure Thing, because characters are probably not aware that they're having to restart over and over again. One of you, I think, made a good point of this in the discussion board so far, that there's sort of like alternate realities, right? Every time the bell hits, it's like a different chain of dialogue is actually taking place, and it's like a reset button, right? So that's one way to look at it, right? So we are obviously aware of this is a reset, or this is a do-over, this is a second chance, right? But the characters are likely not. So that would be, again, a form of dramatic irony. We have this, of course, a lot in Oedipus Rex, where if you guys aren't familiar with the story, I'm sure you can find a quick summary of it, but essentially we're aware that the entire time Oedipus is, having sex with his own mom and is the person on the throne, and so there's this sort of fated irony where he's, trying to go against the gods, and that's not possible. It's never going to happen. So you're going to see plenty of irony, not just in the short stories and poetry and drama that you've read in this class, but you're going to see it in all kinds of pop culture, where someone says something and the other person isn't aware of it, or doesn't know that it's happening, or they say something else but don't mean it, right? And so irony is a key element in literature, and I'm surprised that I was noticing some of the glossaries that I had provided for you guys. Most of the glossary doesn't mention irony at all, and I feel like, oh my gosh, you guys should know about this. So I decided to talk about that now. Okay, so enough about irony. Now I want to talk to you guys about the literary analysis. So I haven't posted the week 15 folder yet, but it is already ready for you guys. I just need to upload it as soon as this lecture is recorded. But I do have the instructions here for the literary analysis, so you do need to take a look at this. And let me open them for you right now. It should look like this. So you'll notice that the due date is Wednesday, December 13th. I think that's the second to last day of finals. I think the last day of finals is Thursday, maybe Friday. I'm not sure. But we don't really have a final in this class because it's an online class. There's no final, and it's a literature class, so there's no test or exam. It was just the 3 literary analysis and discussion board. So today is the 28th. Hopefully everything should be posted by the 29th. So by tomorrow, this folder will be up and live, and you'll have 2 weeks essentially to work on the literary analysis, which means you should do your best to draft, revise, take your time reading the texts again so that you're familiar with them. And of course, you can contact me, visit the Writing Center either in person or online for help. And if you do email me, just let me know what you'd like help on, and I can clarify things for you. And you can always call or text me or email me, right? So let's go through the instructions. All this is pretty much the same as before. Pretty much the only thing that's changed are the prompt and the format, and so something's going to be different from the other ones. So your job is that you need to select 2 of the 3 plays that we have assigned so far. We have Henrik Ibsen's Dollhouse, David Ives' Sure Thing, and Susan Glaspell's Trifles, which you're about to read for this week, or for this coming week. You need to analyze the 2 plays that you select, right? Analyze each play for its use of literary elements and the contribution of those elements to the theme or message of the play. Okay, so for example, you might look at Trifles for its irony, right? We just talked about irony, and determine the effectiveness of irony on the theme of the play, right? So if you think you want to look at irony in Trifles, great. Don't just show me where irony happens and give me examples of it. What I really want to know is, okay, now that you found those examples of irony, are they effective, and how do they affect the theme of the play? How do they contribute to the theme of the play? You could also, look at humor. Humor is a literary element, right? In Sure Thing, for instance, and determine how effective is the humor on its message, right? What is the message of the play, and how is humor helping that message, right? So what I want you to do is to do, you can pick any literary element or elements. If you want to do several elements of one, that's fine. But you need to look at those elements in the play and then tell me how they contribute to the theme or message of the play. That's the point. So you might look at Dollhouse and look at you can do a character analysis as a literary element. You can do a plot analysis. You can do a symbolism. You can look at irony. You can look at settings and so on, imagery. So you can look at all of these elements, right? All the elements we've ever talked about. Your job is just to pick the ones that you think really contribute to the message. Okay. Now, how you organize that is up to you. And this is what's going to be different. Because you're writing, 2 analyses essentially, right? You're writing an analysis of one play and you're writing an analysis of another. You're going to write 2 separate analyses in the same file. So basically, you're going to write 2 mini papers in one. Okay? So rather than trying to combine 2, let's say you do Trifles and you do a Dollhouse, right? Let's say you do those 2 plays, you don't put them in the same essay. They're going to be in the same document, but not in the same essay. So I'll talk about that a little bit further down. But I want to remind you guys that these are, this is a literary analysis assignment, not a summary. So I know a lot of you are tempted to just give me a summary of what happens in the story. I don't need that. That's just a waste of time and energy, and I will be taking points off if you continue to just summarize the paper or summarize the text for me. Because one, your audience, me and your peers essentially, are already familiar with the text. We've already read it. We already know what happens. We don't need to know, right? I'm more concerned with how well you can analyze the plays. So that's what I want. Okay, so early on, you should probably make your choice so that you can read the play several times before you begin to write your analysis. You should try to write more than one draft, right? Don't just write your final draft, 2 days before it's due and then pray for the best. That's probably not going to work. Visit the Writing Center as much as possible if that's going to help you. You can also talk to me if you need help. So that way you can know how to, first how to organize your essay, how to use MLA documentation, because some of you are still having problems with MLA. And keep in mind, MLA documentation changes. So when you're citing a short story versus a a poem and a play, it's always different, right? With short stories, page numbers is fine. With poetry, it's different. We want stanzas and line numbers. And then with plays, you're going to have act, scene, and line numbers too. So those all change as well. So keep that in mind and be familiar with how MLA cites these things and how to do in-text citation. Of course, you're going to need to quote passages from the text in order to support and defend your answer, and that's fine. But make sure that no more than 15% of your paper should be quoted. 1-5, no more than 15%, not 50, 15, should be quoted. Everything else, the 85% of your paper, that should be you. That should be your voice, your words, your analysis, right? I do not want you to consult any other sources. This is not an opportunity. This is not a research paper where you're trying to take other sources and find out what they're saying. There is no research here. It is just your analysis, right? So you've been doing this all semester where you've had an opportunity to answer questions about all these different texts. There really is no need for you to go outside to Shmoop or to Cliff Notes or Spark Notes or any other outside source, right? If you're having to do that, that tells me, one, you're not familiar and you're not having an easy time reading these, even though most of these are pretty simple to read. And two, you're not using your own thought. Like you're incapable of actually analyzing on your own. And that's not okay. You need to be able to analyze these by yourselves and on your own. Okay? Several of you have run into problems, and the reason I'm so adamant that you do not use outside sources is that several of you have been caught plagiarizing. And a couple of you responded saying, no, I didn't plagiarize, or this isn't, I didn't mean to plagiarize. Whether you meant to or not doesn't change it. Okay? If you didn't mean to and it was an accident, oh well. Now you know next time not to. You won't be kicked from the class or anything, but it will be a 0 on the assignment because it's plagiarism. That simple as that. So keep that in mind. There are consequences for plagiarism, and if you think you're plagiarizing, then you probably are. And that's always just a good note to have. So I expect only to have a couple of things on your works cited page, and that's the names of the plays, and that's it. That's all you should be citing are the plays themselves. You should not be citing anything else, and you should not be consulting anything else. This should all come from you. Okay, enough about that. The format is going to be different. So essentially, you're going to be writing two mini papers. Each one's going to be about 500 to 600 words each. That's really short, right? Normally, I know the last time we wrote the poetry analysis, that one was about 1,000 to 1,200 words, or 900 to 1,200 words. I think it was something around that range, because you were comparing two authors to each other, two poets to each other. So it was going to be a longer analysis. But because you're doing two short ones, it's just going to be 500 to 600 words each. So it'll be 1,000 or to 12,000 words total. Okay. So you're going to have 500, 600 words each. You want to start your analysis on one page and your second analysis on a new page. Okay. So start your second analysis on a new page after the works cited page of the first analysis. So you'll have, let's say this is your analysis, right? You'll have the first page will be here. You'll have your heading at the top. You'll have your actual essay, which probably be maybe a page and a half. You'll have your works cited page after that. And then after that works cited page, start a new one and just, start on a new page. But it should not be a new file, because you cannot submit more than one attachment to Blackboard. Okay, so it all needs to be able to fit in the same file. All right. Okay. Now, if that still doesn't make sense to you, if you're having trouble understanding it, please let me know and we can talk about it. Okay. One more thing I want to add. Because the literary analysis is graded anonymously, you don't necessarily have to have your name anywhere on it, but you still need to have the heading. You still need to have, the class name, the date, my name, the page number at the top, all that still needs to be there, but you can take your name off if you want, so that it's anonymous. And I keep it anonymously graded, so that way there's no hint of bias, right? If you feel like I could be possibly, grading against you because, I don't like you as a person, even though I've never met you. I've never met any of you. But if you feel like I have it out for you, well, then we can avoid that by keeping it anonymous, right? And there's a chance I won't show favoritism or anything like that. So if you think that's a possibility, leave your name off. If you don't want to be anonymous, that's fine. You can leave your name there, but I'm still going to try my best not to be biased at all. So I have that option for you guys either way. Okay, so again, pick 2 of the 3 plays that we're covering for this class. You should not be covering any other plays outside of this class. It's just those 3 that we've assigned. Pick 2 of those. You're going to write an analysis for each, answering basically this prompt where you analyze each play for its use of literary elements and the contribution of those elements to the theme or message of the play. Now you can organize that several ways. You can start off with maybe you want to start with the theme first, and you want to argue here's the theme, and here's all the ways that here are all the elements that help make that theme. Or maybe you want to focus on one specific element and show eventually how it leads to a theme. That's up to you. But regardless, you do need to have it in specific format. Your paper will be graded for how effective your thesis is, which means you need to have a thesis, how well you support that thesis, excuse me, how appropriately you use literary terminology and elements. And some of you have been having a problem with this, where you do make an argument, but you don't mention any literary terms, which means you haven't really learned those at all. And so the glossary of literary terms is there. I've been posting it through Blackboard several times. If you're still not familiar with those terms, you need to be. How well you incorporate examples from your text to support your thesis. Again, this is how you quote or how well you reference the plays. Keep in mind that if you do want to talk about an example in the play, you don't necessarily have to quote. You can just refer to that incident or refer to that event in your own words. You can paraphrase. And another way you can avoid summarizing, for instance, you can go out of order, right? Let's say you're doing symbolism in a dollhouse. So if you talk about symbolism in a dollhouse, don't go in order of the way the play goes. Like, well, the first symbol is this, and the second symbol is this, and the third symbol. Like, no, don't do that. Instead, talk about what you think is the strongest symbol and show how that symbol, where that symbol comes up in the play, and then maybe another symbol, maybe the 2 or 3 strongest symbols that you see, and it doesn't really matter in what order we see them, just as long as we know that they exist, right? Same thing with irony or with the plot itself. Focus on what you think is the most important place. It doesn't necessarily have to go in chronological order. How accurately you follow MLA conventions for in-text citation and the works cited bibliography. This is a big one. Some of you still don't know how to cite, and I already mentioned that earlier, so be aware that I am grading you on that. And finally, how well you follow essay organization conventions in grammar, mechanics, and sentence structure. So this one's last because I don't grade that as heavily. This is not a writing class in the sense that I have to grade your writing. I'm grading your understanding of literature and how well you can analyze literature. But of course, you're submitting this as a written document, so yes, I'm going to have to grade some of that, but it's not as important as everything else. So keep that in mind. I'll be sharing with you the rubric for the literary analysis if not in the week 15 folder, I'll do it in the week 16 folder. It just depends. I'll try to get it back to you guys as soon as I can, but I'm still making changes to it. But the instructions are there, and regardless, I am going to grade on these things. That's not changing. So I'm still grading on that, but I want you to be aware that I want you to still be able to see the rubric before you turn it in. Okay. All right. So that's pretty much all I wanted to cover for today. So again, we talked about irony and the 3 types of irony, right? Verbal, situational, dramatic. We talked about, we used story of an hour to kind of show what irony looks like and what examples of it might look like. I talked very briefly about the literary analysis assignment and what to expect. That reminds me. The you'll be submitting your assignment in the week 16 folder. So this is week 15. So when week 16 comes around, there will be a spot for you to submit your assignment. Okay. Again, there's no rough draft due, unless, of course, you want to write a rough draft and send it to me so I can give you feedback. I'd be happy to do that. I'm surprised I haven't had that many students ask me for feedback, because, and again, this is not a writing class, so I usually don't spend too much time on the writing and giving feedback on student writing. But some of you do need some suggestions, I think, and as much as I can try to help you guys through lectures and through discussion board and so on, I still think a lot of you could use some feedback. So if you'd like to get feedback, just shoot me an email or a text, and that's fine. If you want to talk to me over the phone, you can do that too. I only ask that you send me a text or email first to make sure that I'm free and available to talk to you, because obviously I teach other classes, and I have meetings, and I have office hours with other students. So, and of course I've got a family and responsibilities at home. So if you can, please let me know ahead of time that you want to talk over the phone, and I'll be happy to talk to you. All right. If you guys have any questions, you know where to reach me. Thanks.